That was also me stalling so I could turn on my mic. As we begin this morning, it's very important to note two things. They are both birthdays. One is Ivy. It's Ivy's birthday. Can we give her a big round of applause? It is also Elijah Rector's birthday. Three birthdays. Do we have three? It's William's birthday as well. There are three birthdays. William's birthday as well. Oh my goodness. Man, what an exciting day to be at Campus View. It is also Jesse's 8-month-old birthday, but that's not as exciting as the full year. So we'll hold off on that. Well, I may seem joyous, but I will admit to you this morning that I approached the pulpit with a bit more trepidation than I usually would this morning, because we are beginning a 3-week series on politics. Yes. And I want to be clear from the outset that this series is not about politics in a partisan sense. It is not about what party or politician or policy for which you should vote for. That's not what this is about. But rather, the goal of this series is to look at Scripture in order to help us cultivate a uniquely Christian witness amidst our politically divisive day and age. All right? That's the goal. And you can go and skip 2 slides, Ben. You can go and skip past the Mark 12. Just to the intro slide. Thank you. That's what this is about. And specifically, we're going to be focusing on Jesus' words that Cassandra just read over us in Mark chapter 12, verse 17. Give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's. Better than any other, I think these words of Jesus summarize Scripture's teachings on politics. Now, when we approach a topic like this, most of you fall into one of two camps. And I want to address both camps before we begin. And no, those camps are not left and right, but rather these camps are this. I think that you either probably care deeply about politics or you don't necessarily care for or about politics. And I want to address both of those camps before we kind of begin this journey together this morning. So for those of you who may not care about politics, right? Maybe you think that it's your grandparents or your aunt or your uncle or your parents or your classmate or your neighbor, and you see all the things that they post on social media about politics, and you're like, man, they're the ones who have a problem with politics. They're the ones that need this series. But, I don't really care, so this is kind of pointless for me, right? Maybe you don't care about politics, or maybe you think politics is controversial, right? By the way, I don't think you're wrong. I feel that tangibly in this moment. And so you don't care for politics. You think that bringing it up will unnecessarily divide us. But here's the thing. Even if you don't care about politics, even if you don't care for politics, me and you, we all still traffic in a world that is absolutely, and I mean absolutely, ravaged by political divide. We all live in a culture that is trying to push us into one political camp or another, and to make it the defining trait of our lives, to make it the theme that frames and fills and defines our existence, to make it the lens through which we process and interpret and articulate all the other parts of our experience in this world. And here's the thing, neglecting and avoiding that reality won't make it go away. And so it's imperative that we as a church talk about how Satan uses politics to tempt us away from the cross-shaped life that we've all signed up for as Christians through our baptism. And it's also imperative that we as a church talk about how a cross-shaped life can uniquely speak into our politically divisive day and age. Now, that's for those of you who may not care about or for politics, and that's probably a good portion of you. You may think I'm over it at this point. But there's also a good portion of you in this room that care deeply about politics. And if you're someone who's deeply invested into politics, you might believe that the stakes are so high because of our cultural climate. And by the way, I'm very willing to see that our cultural climate is heightened and that the stakes do feel and in some ways are very high. But you may believe that the stakes are so high that you're going to hear Jesus' words this morning, and you're going to be tempted to say something like this. Yes, Jesus. But in our day and age, we need to do this, not that. If Jesus knew what our culture was like today, I think Jesus probably would have said, well, this, and maybe not that. And if you'd be tempted to either twist or dilute Jesus' words on politics this morning, I simply want to remind all of us of two things about the context of the passage that Cassandra just read over us. The first is this. That's Mark chapter 12. After Mark chapter 11, Jesus is in Jerusalem, and we're in the final week of Jesus' life in Mark chapter 12. That means that less than a week after Jesus says the words, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar," on what kind of cross will he die? Which empires? Rome's. But less than a week after Jesus says, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's," he is going to die on Caesar's cross. Second piece of context that I think is really important. That's kind of the narrative context, but then there's also the context of the Gospel of Mark. Now, most scholars think that the Gospel of Mark was probably written in the wake of Emperor Nero's persecution of Christians in the city of Rome itself. Emperor Nero is the one who is known to light up the city of Rome's night sky with Christians like tiki torches, literally burning them alive to light up the Roman night sky. So just when you think about that, Mark is writing down these words. By the way, Emperor Nero is also the one who killed Peter. Okay? By the way, on an upside-down cross, a Roman cross once again. The stakes don't get higher than that, right? Can we all agree? I need a yes or no. The stakes don't get higher than that, right? Okay. So, no matter what you believe to be at stake, no matter what I believe to be at stake, if we want to be Christians, if we want to be followers of Jesus, then we must listen to his words in Mark 12. They are inescapable. They cannot be twisted, but rather we must allow for them to put up a mirror to our heart and our mind and our soul to us this morning. And so with that said, let's begin by looking at our text for this morning, and then which is going to be Mark chapter 12, and then we're going to talk about how that exposes our culture's political temptations. And then, because this is kind of a doom and gloom sermon, our AC's not working well, we're kind of trying to raise the temperature on you and fire, hell, and brimstone. I'm trying to really manifest that, apparently. Because it's a little bit more doom and gloom, we'll end by asking the question, well, hey, where's the good news in all of this? Because I think there is a lot of good news in all of this. So, if you have a Bible, I encourage you, open up Mark chapter 12. We're going to pick up in our story in verse 13. Now, in Mark chapter 12, we find a very unlikely political pairing. That is the Pharisees and the Herodians. So if you're a Jew in first century, if you're a Jew living in Jerusalem in the first century, your posture towards Rome dictated everything, right? You were either considered to be in the pocket of Rome or you were utterly against Rome. Okay, those are kind of your two choices. And the Pharisees and the Herodians ended up on different sides of that question, okay? The Herodians, the best way I know to put this, they had in many ways replaced God with politics. In other words, instead of looking to Yahweh for their sustenance and their significance and their status and their salvation, the Herodians were a group of people who looked to Rome for all of those things. So Herod, we all know Herod because of the nativity stories. By the time Jesus is, about to be crucified, I want to say it's that that would be Herod the Great. This would be Herod the Great's grandson, maybe. I think that's in charge. I could be, don't quote me on that. But this is Herod. And Herod was the puppet governor over Jerusalem that Rome put in place. This is not the Jews, like Herod's not even Jewish by birth. And so this is not like the Jews' king. This is Rome's king for Jerusalem, okay? And so the Herodians were people who supported him and kind of put themselves in the pocket of Rome. And so what they were doing is they were looking to Rome for their significance and their sustenance and their salvation and their status, all right? And then on the other hand, you have the Pharisees. Oh, goodness, the Pharisees. And what they had done is the best way to put this is they had equated God with politics. The Pharisees are the group of people that wanted the classic Jewish Messiah, someone that's going to come in, overthrow their Roman oppressors, restore Israel as a nation state. That's what they wanted, right? And really, the key here is that they had confused their agenda with God's agenda, equating the two. They thought my agenda must be God's agenda because it's my agenda. And so they had equated God and country, okay? But these groups come together because Jesus is making both of them mad. And so they corner Jesus, and you remember all the platitudes from the reading that Cassandra just did, all those kind of nice things they were saying about him. They're trying to gather a crowd around him because they're about to ask him a question that they think is going to trap him. Right? They want Jesus to have to answer this question, a very difficult question, in front of a big crowd so that his popularity would finally decrease. And this is the question they ask him. They say, is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? Should we pay it or shouldn't we? This tax that they're talking about, the imperial tax, was imposed on Jerusalem in AD 6, so about 27 years before Jesus' crucifixion. It had been one of the most hotly debated political issues in Jerusalem by the time that Jesus comes onto the scene proclaiming, "Repent, for the kingdom of God or heaven has drawn near." And there's even a revolt earlier on. I think you all know, right, that Jesus is not the only person that went around in Jerusalem claiming to be a Messiah. There were a lot of messiahs. There were false messiahs, but there were a lot of messiahs of that day. One of them was named Judas, ironically enough. And he had this whole campaign, and his kind of messianic campaign was the classic Jewish one where you're going to come in and overthrow Rome. And his slogan for this campaign was this: "Down with taxes to Caesar." Now, what do you think Rome did to him? Man, they crushed him. I mean, just destroyed this guy. So very hotly debated political issue, okay, in this day and age. So Jesus, right, if Jesus, when he's posed this question, if he sides with the Herodians and he answers yes, then that will turn the Jewish crowd who loved him because of all of his healings and his mass feedings. It would turn those Jewish crowds who loved him against him. Right? This tax that, if he answers yes, this tax is a constant reminder that they were dominated by a foreign power. Right? And that's not something that the Jews in Jerusalem liked very much. But if he sides with the Pharisees and he answers, "No, I don't think we should pay these taxes," well, Rome's just going to do to him what they did to Judas, right? They're going to crush him. And so Jesus responds, why are you trying to trap me? Bring the denarius and let me look at it. And they brought him a coin, and he asked them, "Whose image is on this?" By the way, that's a denarius up on the screen. This is from the time that Jesus would have been talking. So this denarius up here says, "To you, Tiberius Caesar, august son of the divine Augustus." So there's Julius Caesar, who adopts Augustus Caesar, who then adopts Tiberius Caesar, okay? And that's the lineage that we're on. And when Jesus was crucified, Tiberius Caesar is kind of the emperor of Rome at the time. And so they bring him this coin, and he asks them, "Whose image is on this and whose inscription?" And they replied, "Caesar's. It's Caesar's." What's going on here? Okay, what's going on here? Let's unpack this for a second. So whenever Tiberius Caesar took over for Augustus Caesar, how did people know? Well, how about before him when Augustus Caesar took over for Julius Caesar? Or how about when Julius Caesar consolidated the Roman Empire under his power? How did people know across the empire that was so vast, spread all the way from like Spain to like Arabia, and as far north as Germany and the British Isles down to like Sicily? I mean, vast empire. How did they know across this empire? There's not TV, there's not a news app, there's not the web, there's not even postage as me and you conceive of it. How do they know? Who's in charge? Well, at the beginning of each reign of a new Caesar was a campaign of statues built and coinage imprinted that all witness to this reality. There's a new Caesar in town. And he is Lord and he is God. And the reason this was done was to justify that Caesar's rule over the whole of the Roman Empire. And now with this illustration set up, Jesus says, "Hey, why don't you take this coin out of the pocket? By the way, you all have Rome in your pocket. Therefore, whether you're a Pharisee or a Herodian, you're all in the pocket of Rome, if we're going to be honest with ourselves." Jesus finally answers their politically charged question, and his answer amazes them all. He says, "Give back to Caesar what is Caesar's. This has Caesar's face on it. Give it back to him. But give to God what is God's," or the King James, right? "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and render unto God what is God's." This coin has Caesar's face imprinted on it. Its purpose is to witness to his rule and his reign. You know what? Give it back to him. That's not against your religion. That's not against Yahweh. Just give Caesar back the thing that he's divine Lord. Give it back to him. But then follow the logical conclusion. Okay, this coin is made in the image of Caesar, therefore give it back to Caesar. What is made in the image of God? Ha ha ha! Me and you. Okay, fine. Caesar gets your coin, but God gets you. He gets the entirety of your being. He gets the totality of your essence. He gets the entirety, the whole of your life. Give Caesar your coins, but don't give him your allegiance. don't give him your allegiance. For you were not made in his image. That coin was made in his image. Give it back to him. But you were made in the image of God. That is who gets your allegiance. And so, just as Jesus' wisdom speaks into his politically divided age, it speaks into ours as well. I think Jesus is saying to us, pay your taxes as much as it hurts. Be good citizens. For us, get informed. We live in a democracy. Vote. Care. Care. You can care about politics. That's okay as a Christian. But render your allegiance to God alone. Don't expect your salvation. Don't expect your sustenance. Don't expect your status. Don't expect your significance to be derived from Rome or for us, DC. God alone can provide. To put it another way, Washington, D.C., no matter which political party is in power, deserves your allegiance. It is only the kingdom of God that does. And this is where the rubber is really going to meet the road, because now the question becomes a little bit more personal, all right? And that is, what does all of this expose about not their culture's political temptations, but our culture's political temptations that me and you all get caught up in, particularly in election season? The debate did just happen on Tuesday. The question for the rest of this morning is this: in what ways do me and you render unto Caesar's what is rightfully God amidst our politically divisive day and age? And my answer is going to be extraordinarily oversimplified, but it is hot in here, and I don't think you want me preaching for an hour. And so you're going to have to bear with a little bit of oversimplification. But I think there are three main political temptations in our politically divisive day and age, and these are what they are. The first thing is, I think that the left replaces God with politics. I think the right often equates God with politics. And I think both sides slap God's name onto their agenda, respectively breaking the first and the second and the third of the Ten Commandments. So let's unpack each of those. The first commandment, it's a great commandment from God. So remember, the Ten Commandments are given right after the Exodus. So this is Exodus chapter 20. And God says to Moses to say to the Israelites, I am the Lord your God who brought you up out of Egypt. I am a God who is faithful. This is what David talked about in communion. I am a God who is faithful. I brought you up out of Egypt, the land of slavery. Therefore, you should have no other gods beside me. In other words, do not replace me with, and do not add alongside me a false God, one who cannot deliver you, one who cannot provide for you, one who cannot give you hope. In short, one who is not going to be faithful to you. I alone am faithful. I'm alone your deliverer. So don't put your hope in anything else. Don't put your trust in anything else. Don't put your allegiance in anything else. Don't put your hope in anything that will enslave you once again. It is only when you enslave yourself to me that you experience true freedom. This is the temptation that I think left-wing, liberal, democratic politics is prone to fall into. Replacing God on the throne of our lives with government, seeking to find our salvation and our sustenance and our significance and our status in the government rather than a God, and therefore giving it our allegiance. I'm a big fan of the show The West Wing. Y'all familiar with The West Wing? Love the show The West Wing. It ages me a little bit, but I love The West Wing. It follows a Democratic presidential administration that lasts 8 years, and I love this show. But I think it's often very interesting how this show talks about politics and the nature of politics. And in this show, there's a character named Toby. He's the communications director for the president, President Bartlett, for those of you familiar with the show. And Toby is kind of the ultimate Democrat. He's the voice of conscience. He's the true believer in the room, okay? And so when Toby speaks, you're really kind of getting to the soul of kind of the left-wing politics, okay? That's how he's painted, okay, when Toby speaks. And this is a quote from Toby from the show. This is what he says. Politics, or government, this is what he says, government is a source of hope for the people, a place where no one gets left behind, a beacon of light in a dark world. That is all very religious and churchy language, is it not? Have we traded God for government? Maybe a more practical question, what is it about the U.S. government, no matter what political party is in charge, Whigs, Republicans, Federalist, Anti-Federalist, Democrats, what is it about the U.S. government that ever made us think that it was a source of hope for the people, a place where no one gets left behind, and a beacon of light in a dark world? You see, one of the biggest problems of our secularizing world, a world that is increasingly, and hear this, intentionally negligent of the presence and the power of the divine, is that we have turned inwards on ourselves and we have placed our hope in human progress and ingenuity, that we can figure this out by ourselves. Right? We really think in our modern age, with all of our technology and all our sophistication and all of our human, so quote unquote, wisdom, that we can solve strife between nations like Russia and Ukraine, the US and Iran, Israel and Palestine, China and Taiwan, by the sheer power of diplomacy and without any divine intervention. We think we can do that by ourselves? We think that we can fix socioeconomic strife like inflation and debt and healthcare and poverty and the rural versus urban divide and the racial division and the education gap and gender inequality. We think we can fix all of that with our own smarts and our own goodness and without any of God's grace. We think we can end world hunger with our own resourcefulness and without divine wisdom. The problem with world hunger is not resources. It is not scarcity. It is selfishness. We think we can resolve what both parties have called a crisis at the border at different points over the past few decades through some sort of brilliant policy or sheer human spirit, and without the power of the Holy Spirit of God interacting with our extraordinarily broken systems. Now, this list could go on and on and on and on and on, but yet again, it is hot, and the heat's turning up on me, trust me. But the point is this. Politics is man-made. It is creature. It is neither intrinsically good or bad, but it is certainly not God who is creator. And therefore, politics, government, no matter what party is in charge, deserves your allegiance because it cannot be faithful to you in the way that only God can be. Do not render unto Caesar's what only God deserves. Now, if you find yourself on the maybe right side of the political aisle, you may think to yourself, Ben, it's hot. This has been a great sermon. Let's end it right here and let's all go home. But in the words of Lee Corso, not so fast, my friend, because there is also the second commandment. Exodus chapter 20, verse 4. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or the earth beneath, or the waters below. In other words, what God is saying, by the way, this is the Ten Commandments. What is Israel doing at the bottom of Mount Sinai when Moses is getting the Ten Commandments from God? What is Israel doing? They're building a golden calf. And do you know what Aaron says about that golden calf? These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. Tomorrow we will have a festival to Yahweh. In other words, this is not a different God. What Aaron is saying is this golden calf is Yahweh, breaking the second commandment. In other words, what the second commandment is really about is do not equate me, transcendent creator of all of creation, with something inside of my creation. Do not try to domesticate me. Do not try to tame me into a calf that is dependent upon its mother for milk so that you can control me and you can understand me. This is the temptation that I think right-wing, conservative, Republican politics is prone to make. If you ask someone what their priorities are, this is the best way I know to explain this. If you ask someone what their priorities are, what are they most likely to tell you? God, family, and country, right? We say God, say with me, God, family, country, right? I mean, that if you ask someone what your priorities are, that's what people say often. God, family, country, ranked in that order. However, even though we say God, family, country, I think what we mean when we say that, or better yet, maybe the best way to put this is what we aspire to when we say that is this: God equals family, equals country. You say God, family, country, but what we want is this up on the screen behind me. We want all three of those things to share the same values and function inside of the same worldview. And by the way, If you're tempted towards that, I think that's very understandable. Wouldn't it be nice if God equals family equals country? Life would be easier, would it not? It would mean that we don't have to have divided allegiances, and therefore we do not have to engage in an extraordinarily difficult practice of discernment. But here's the thing. Jesus makes a radical distinction between the God of Israel and Caesar, and they are to be rendered different things. One, your taxes, one, the whole of your being. Paul tells the church in Philippi, which, by the way, Philippi was filled with former Roman soldiers, Roman centurions, and so it's one of the most patriotic provinces in all of the Roman Empire. And what does he tell them? Your citizenship is where? In heaven, not in Rome. And Peter identifies the Christians in Asia Minor who are beginning to experience cultural shifts, social relegation, economic marginalization, and physical persecution. And do you know what he calls them from the outset of his letter? He says, you are foreigners and exiles. In other words, you were never meant to be comfortable here in the first place. Don't buy into that unchristian lie that that's something that we should aspire to. When we forget this radical distinction between God and government, it constantly puts us in a defensive position, right? Think about it. If we buy into this false reality, this unchristian lie that God equals family equals politics or country, when my politics are attacked in this scheme, when my politics are attacked, when my vision of this country is attacked, what is also attacked? God. Have we tamed God into something that is threatened by the powers of this world? Have we broken the second commandment? What do we do? What do we do when my politics gets attacked and we've equated them with God? Rightfully, or God has been attacked. We recoil. We get defensive, do we not? And by the way, when we do that, what does that witness to the world around us? It witnesses to the world around us that we don't think Jesus is actually in charge. When we writhe our hands in fear and say our country's going to hell in a handbasket, and we act just like, oh my goodness, the world's coming to end because the other party's going to get elected, guess what? We reveal to the world that we don't actually think Jesus is king, that he isn't sitting at the right hand of the throne of God. One of my favorite quotes comes from a book called Gilead. Anyone know Gilead? Written by Marilyn Robinson. Beautiful book. It's written in the voice of an old preacher who's about to die, but he had a son later on in his life. And it's just these journals, and he's writing down these letters to his son. And in the midst of one of these letters, this Marilyn Robinson, through this kind of person, this preacher, writes these words. She says, nothing true can be said of God out of a posture of defense. And the reason I think that's so true is because the moment that me and you think we need to defend God, we have not understood rightly who God is. Have we tamed God into a calf that is dependent upon its mother for milk? Have we tamed God into something that means mine and your defense? Or do we worship the transcendent creator of all creation who does not need our defense, but rather is our defender? It is God who created us. It is God who created us. It is God who existed before us. It is God who will exist after we die. And it'll be God who resurrects us after we die. Let's live inside that reality. The third commandment, Exodus chapter 20, verse 7. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. For the Lord your God will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. The way I love one translation puts it is this. Don't lift up the Lord's name to empty purposes. And for our point, don't lift up the Lord's name to empty political purposes. Or in other words, don't slap God's name onto your political agenda. Think about it. Jesus did not map on neatly to his culture's political agendas, right? He didn't fall into either camp. And the same is true today. This is the temptation I think both parties have fallen into over the past few years. I mean, I know we live in a secular world, but even in our secularizing world, over the past really 8 to 12 years, we have seen political stunts
from our political leaders on both sides of the aisle, where they wield God and the Bible and religious language to further their own plans and purposes and agendas. Trump did this. By the way, Biden, even though he's, we may think Democrats are the society of party of secularism, Biden used tons of religious imagery, tons of it, quoted scripture in a lot of his addresses. Both parties do this. Both of them have done this. And we use religious language in order to baptize our political agenda. But the problem with this, the reason the third commandment's in the 10 Commandments is because we've missed the point. Because it's not about our agenda and God being on our side, right? It's about God's agenda and us aligning ourselves with God's agenda. And so we miss the point when we slap God's name onto our agenda. It reduces God, hear this, when this happens, when politicians do this, it reduces God to nothing more than a means to an end. And so think about what they are witnessing to the world about what they believe about God when they do this. They're witnessing to the world that what they think God is a means to their power. Now, this idea of witness, what are we witnessing to the world? That's what we're going to pick up next week. This has been a descriptive sermon, right? I mean, very descriptive. We have not engaged at all in how do we really chart a course forward, okay? If this is the reality in which we live, how should we as Christians live? That's next week. If you thought this one was intimidating for me, it's much more intimidating next week, okay? Much more intimidating. Trying to have a prescription for this reality, very intimidating, okay? But that's what we'll pick up next week. However, since it has been hot and a little bit fire and brimstone-y, and because this has been a difficult message for us to receive in a lot of ways, I do, as I said earlier, want to end by pointing out quickly 3 pieces of good news amidst all of these temptations. What do these temptations reveal about God that is good news to me and you? Sound good? Let's do this thing. All right, the first. Well, you're going to notice that these align with the first 3 commandments. So what I think the first commandment reveals, and the temptation that it reveals to us, is that God is faithful. Now, it is no secret that politicians make promises that they cannot keep, right? At their worst, a politician's promise is a vague, shallow, partisan assertion that they can make things better than the other side. Trump, make America great again. Biden, build back better. Both of them, vague, shallow, partisan assertions that I can make this country better than the other side. And even at their best, hear this, even at their best, politicians are still unable to execute on their good intentions. They are thwarted. Even if they have perfect intentions, those intentions are thwarted by sin and death and the curse. But here's the good news. The good news is this. God is actually faithful to his promises. We don't have to we aren't left with a binary choice of one political party or another. We as Christians tie ourselves and tether ourselves to the God of the Exodus, who delivers us out of bondage and into his care. The God of the Exodus is a God who is good and great, a God who is merciful and mighty, a God who, yes, is willing and able to act on mine and yours behalf. Other gods, other political parties might be good, they might be merciful, they might be willing, but they are not great. They are not mighty, and they are not able. Some political parties might be great. They might be mighty. They might be able. But they are certainly not good. And they are certainly not merciful. And they are certainly not willing. It is only God. By the way, we as Christians, theologically, we would not want to claim that anything else is capable of being both good and great, merciful, mighty, and willing and able to act on our behalf, right? We would not want to reveal to the world that we think anything other than God could do those things. So you don't want to fall into saying a political party could do that. God will bring our good about no matter what the cost. The God of the Exodus will. No matter what the cost, even the death of his own son. Politicians may fail us, but the God of the crucifixion and the resurrection never will. He is trustworthy. And therefore, we should put our trust in him. That is good news, is it not? The second piece of good news that I want you to reap from this morning is this. It is not just that God is faithful, but God is extraordinarily transcendent. When we rank God amongst other things, even if he is number one, I think we actually degrade who God is. I'm telling you, I don't think you should rank God number one on your priority list. Why? Because God is not the number one priority amongst others. God is the reality out of which we derive the rest of our priorities. And so when we rank God amongst other things, I think it degrades who God really is. When we rank God number one, we're saying he's not transcendent above these things. He's just the number one priority amongst them. He's transcendent reality that preexists everything else in our lives, including ourselves, by the way, including our politics and our politicians. And this is extraordinarily good news. Think about it. This means that God is transcendent above the failures of your own political party. When your political party fails, guess what? Doesn't matter. God's still transcendent above it. God's not writhing his hands in fear. But also hear this, very important. It's not this that God is transcendent above your own political party's failures. God is transcendent above any threat that you see in the other side of the political aisle. When you think, oh, those people over there, if they get in power, yeah, man, the world's going to hell in a handbasket. Guess what? We believe as Christians that God's transcendent above their threat. Do we act that way? Do we act that way? Do we act that way? Psalm 2 beautifully says this: God scoffs as the nations conspire against him. They're playing checkers. Guess what he's playing? Chess. You see the great hope in this. No matter what political party wins in November of this year, God is not threatened, even if it's the political party that you did not vote for. We do not derive our hands in fear because God's kingdom is an unshakable kingdom. And so hear this, we should tether ourselves to him rather than tethering him to our own political parties. The final piece of good news I want to leave you with this morning is this, and that is that God's imagination for our good is far greater than our own. I want you to imagine the best politician possible in your eyes. They're pure in heart. Somehow they've avoided being caught up in all the politics of governing. They are sharp as a whip, and they share your values perfectly. I mean, they are able to articulate the things that you think and believe better than you could yourself, right? The perfect politician. And even if there were the perfect politician, which I all think we would agree there is not, God's imagination for our good is still greater than our own. The good news is that no matter how good a political agenda is, it will still pale in comparison to the agenda of the kingdom of God, God's good plans and purposes for his people and his world. His goodness knows no bounds, not even our imagination. God's imaginative. We are not. His plans and purposes for you and me in this world, better than anything we could ever conceive of. That is great, good, wonderful news. And so why would we try to equate God with politics? Why would we try to replace God with politics? And why would we ever try to slap God's name onto our agenda when his agenda has always been better? If you want to be baptized this morning into that beautiful agenda, the agenda of God's good plans and purposes for his people in this world, or if you want to respond to this message in any way, we invite you to do so now as we stand and as we sing by either coming forward or